This is the Parliament Channel and Parliament Radio 105.5 FM. Follow the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago on Twitter. Our call sign is @TTParliament.
The Honourable the Vice President.
Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, just before the break, I was making the point about the allocation to the ministry under this bill of $771,704,362. And Mr. Vice President, I was making the point that sometimes when I look at the money that has passed through the country in the context of what Senator Shriki Soon identified as the prospects for investing in sectors which had growth potential, I made the point in a previous debate, and I want to make it again because I think there will be even greater clarity now. Of this 771 million contained in this bill, I want to make the point that there's an issue I raised and one that was in the public domain recently and would remain there for a while. It's a matter involving the Estate Management and Business Development Company and the expenditure of $400 million on the construction of, ostensibly for the construction of roads in the year 2015. And that $400 million, Mr. Vice President, was a loan that was taken approved by the EMBD board at the time in July 2015, a loan in the sum of $400 million. And of this $771 million, Mr. Vice President, allocated to the ministry in this fiscal, a payment of $109 million has to be made towards that $400 million loan. And once I remain in this position, I think I have 2 more years of pain, because it hurts me, Mr. Vice President. These roads brought no value for money. In fact, these roads are falling apart, as though they were paved with toilet paper, falling apart in areas where we can only hope would become productive agriculture areas. And Mr. Vice President, given this $109 million this year that will go towards the payment of that loan, that payment, by the way, represents 15% of the ministry's recurrent expenditure. That payment would have been able to do 236 kilometers of agriculture access road in this fiscal year. It would have brought economic activity to several rural communities in the form of construction contracts. It would have created jobs in those communities, and we would have been able to sustain a complete 236 million road repair program over this fiscal year. But it must go this year, next fiscal, and the fiscal that follows towards something for which we got no value for money. And that is painful. Mr. Vice President, I want to talk about land tenure. And land tenure has been the subject of two considerations by GSCs in the last session. One on state land in general, and the other one on state land and its role in food production. And again, Mr. Vice President, when I see what is happening out there with the floods, for example, during Brett, when I went up, the first place I went after the rain stopped falling, I went to Orange Grove, where we have some of the most productive farmers. And the farmers up there said to me, because I was surprised, that even after we invested heavily in retention ponds and improving the irrigation system and so on, some parcels of land still flooded. That had to do with the volume of rain, but that also had to do with the fact that these farmers still do not have tenure of land, of the land. And without tenure, they are not going to make the sort of investment they need to make. If they had the 30-year lease, the standard agricultural lease, renewable for another 30 years, they would have been able to see themselves and their families 60 years into the future. Unlike any other businessman, because people have a problem understanding that farmers are businessmen. But they have not. And it is a fault, the blame rests with successive administrations and public servants and other players, where we have not, decades, we have not been able to deal with this tenure and to deal with the backlog. And there's something that people don't take into consideration. And in our response to the two reports, we make the point in the response. In the Caroni VSEP program, by offering 2-acre parcels of land and residential lots to former workers, we created 20,000 new files. And the distribution of the 2-acre plots to people who may never farm those plots was given priority, leaving highly productive farmers behind. And I spoke previously about our investment in technology last fiscal and an allocation under the development program, where we have been working on creating electronic files, of using the technology to enable us to deal with this backlog and these leases and so on. And it is only when, notwithstanding everything you say about the food import bill and import substitution and this and that and access road, it is land tenure that the PNM placed very high up in the manifesto. It's land tenure and those leases that would contain the motivation for not farmers, but farming families to make an investment in agriculture in this country. That thing called land tenure. And that in this fiscal year remains a priority of the ministry. On the issue of land tenure, let me just say, when we talk about youth in agriculture, everybody, it's a cliche. Young people should get in agriculture. But I'll tell you what the young people have said to me, whether it is YAPA or whatever youth program we had. As I've gone around the country, they have said to me, but what we will plant on. So, in this fiscal, having listened to them, they've said to me no land, no financing, no support. One of the problems I have as a minister, and a minister who goes around the country, constantly talking to the people I serve, is that I do not have the sort of tools that I need to be able to assist people who are productive or capable of being productive. And the two things I want to emphasize in this budget is the allocation of the $50 million to ADB and the $20 million allocated under the Ministry of Finance for this new agriculture incentive. Because that, Mr. Vice President, means that we can combine the opportunity for land with new financing targeting young farmers or potential young farmers, and a new incentive up to $100,000 that would assist them in getting into productive agriculture. And if we can use the tree and the training that the ministry offers free to citizens of this country, if we can combine this four as we intend to in this fiscal, we would sow the seed, literally, of creating a future food production flow for this country. Because it's been talked about a lot in a cliche, and it's time that we get it done. And those four elements could help us to get it done in this fiscal. On the issue of agro-processing too, when you go, Mr. Vice President, you know, when the media and the citizens of this country meet me as minister and they ask me about the food import bill, well, there's one thing that I always have to remind them, because people believe that the food import bill is the business of the minister. Well, I don't consume $669 million in alcohol every year. So it's not only me drinking up that tab, but in that $5.6 billion food import bill, you have $669 million in alcohol. People feel the food import bill is sweet pepper and cassava. There's a lot of things that go in there. And when you have an opportunity to make a purchasing decision, you have the power to support young farmers, farmers in your community, farmers in your neighborhood. You have the opportunity. It's you who have control, just as I have control over it. And again, when you go around on the supermarkets, for example, you see increasing amounts of locally processed products. Whether it's perfect peppers with the pepper jelly, Bertie's and a whole range of world-class pepper sauce. There's a new one called Lashin that I particularly like, in the range of chocolates. One of our producers, Dwayne Dove from Tobago Estate, just won the Global Gold for the best dairy milk bar. This country has the potential, if we as the buyers are willing to give our mouth a rest and let our money do the talking. Because when it all aggregates, it benefits. There's a group, Mr. Vice President, in my community in Bish, occupying an abandoned community center, producing a brand of chocolate called Bish and Kush. 2 women from the community. It all adds up, and we have control over it. Because we could build how many packing houses you want. You could go to how many ICA seminars on cassava production you want. Only thing will make a difference is when we put our money where our mouth is and start supporting the producers who are putting local products on your reach. And one of the best things, Mr. Vice President, one of the best things we've done as a government for the farmers of this country cost us next to nothing. A farmers market in the Queen's Park, Savannah, that almost 3,000 people pass through and buy.
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
A farmers market that going around the new building in Chaguanas. Because I always say, I want to be a minister of agriculture. When I look out my window, I see farmers. I see farmers, because that's the people I work for. And farmers from all over the country. Outside the town hall, on the Harris Promenade, on a Friday, farmers from all over. Because part of the problem I identified before was the proliferation of middlemen buying produce from the farmers in the field, and it going through a set of hands, and by the time it reached to Senator Ramdeen to buy, the tomato is $40 a kg. Farmers selling for $8 by the farm fence. And the farmer's market gives the man with a bucket of lime an opportunity to sell next to the fellow with a truckload of sweet potato for free. And those are the kinds of things, a combination of government spending money in the places where we believe we will make a boost, recognizing that successive governments, all of us must take responsibility for it. Successive governments have spent money all over, access road and fisheries facility and all sorts of things. Agriculture contribution to the GDP, flatline. But the confidence of the farmers has been down. And if there's one thing, Mr. Vice President, I believe I provide for the farmers of this country is leadership and confidence that as minister and as a government, I have their backs every day. Thank you very much.
Senator Mahabir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for granting me this opportunity to contribute to this debate this afternoon. First, let me commend the Honorable Minister for piloting her very first appropriations bill in this chamber. It was not an easy bill to pilot because the economic environment is not the most pleasant. I would like also, as coordinator of the independent bench, to welcome the three new senators, Senator Haynes, Obika, and Hussain, on the opposition bench. Senator Obika is well known to me, a former student of mine at the University of the West Indies, and I look forward to the contributions of all three new senators. And I also wish to place on record how much I really appreciated the contributions and the interactions with former Senators Sturge, Samuels, and Solomon, also of the opposition bench. I would like to express my gratitude to my colleague, Senator Shriki, for agreeing to lead off the budget debate on behalf of the bench. And after he led off, there was a view that there was very little left for the bench to contribute because he said almost everything that needed to be said. But I'm grateful to him for at least providing me a little bit of space. I am grateful to him for laying the groundwork, Mr. Vice President, so that I may be allowed to pursue other avenues other than the strict macroeconomic. And the reason for that, Mr. Vice President, is that I have seen this fiscal package before. Similar fiscal package. Of course, it is the first for the Honorable Minister West, but I have been analyzing in detail budgets for the national community outside the Parliament and now in the Parliament since 1992. And this would, I think, be my 26th consecutive budget that I have been looking at in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And I would have seen it before. And what I saw before was what we are experiencing now, Mr. Vice President. We are seeing a very huge gap between how much we are earning and how much we are spending at the level of the government. This particular gap has a history, as Senator Rambharat has indicated. If we go back, we will see way back in 2005, and I shan't spend too much time on the history, but I go back to the history so that we may be informed on what perhaps we can do in the future to avoid a replication. Because when I say I have seen this before, I was hoping that I would have seen something new, but I'm seeing the same thing. And what I'm seeing is that this deficit, colleagues have said it is 9 years, I have counted 10, because the first deficit budget we ran was 2009. in 2008, the then government had budgeted for 2009 revenues of some $52 billion, and they were able to collect only 37. That was in the year of the crisis. So that we have had a deficit 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And come 18, we are running another deficit. 10 years, a decade. And I'm coming to that because there are some things which need to change. The paradigm needs to change. I agree with the government on that. And deficits have some problems associated with them. And the problems are that the deficits give rise to debt. Deficits need to be financed. What is a deficit? I don't have it. I need to get it from somewhere. I am going to borrow it, and it adds up to my stock of debt. What I would have liked to see in the presentation of the Honorable Minister, and I'm hoping maybe in her summing up, she will provide it, because in the budgets of Wendell Motley, way back, Minister, in 1992, you always had, of total government's expenditure, how much went to goods and services, how much went to wages and salaries, how much went to transfers and subsidies, and how much went to debt servicing. In his presentation, the Honorable Minister of Finance in the other place indicated that debt servicing may now be absorbing some 20% of his revenues. What we are seeing with debt servicing is this. While there is central government debt, there is also the Petrotrin, the TNTech, the WASA, the Caribbean Airlines, and we heard that the THA would be given an opportunity to borrow. And when Senator Shriki soon spoke on the THA's ability to borrow, I smiled inwardly because in my very first presentation in the Senate in 1996, my very first maiden contribution, it's as if I had replicated what he had to say 20 years later. How could an agency which is receiving transfers from the central government determined by law qualify for a rating to borrow autonomously? How could it do that? Because it meant that we are simply saying we are allowing the THA to have a debt window, which of course will be absorbed and financed by Trinidad and by the central government, and therefore it is another arm, like we have a TNTech or a Petrotrin that will borrow. The problem with the debt is this. If we were to see how debt servicing, interest payments, and principal repayments have changed over the last 5 years, we would see a gradual increase. So while we may not know every debt which exists in the country, we may not know all the bonds of TNTech, we may not know all the CAL and so on. Agencies have a way of not presenting everything. We do know that they must be serviced, and the creditors know what is due to them, and it is going to have to be sourced by the Minister of Finance. And so we need to see how this debt servicing is rising year after year after year. And what is of concern to me is this. The concern, Mr. Vice President, is that as the price of oil and gas rises, in fact, I think the government is very cautious with respect to its projections for oil and gas. My own reading of the oil market in particular suggests that we maybe, when the supplies, the inventory levels have dwindled as they have, we could see a gradual increase in the price, maybe to the mid-50s. Senator Small, in any event, is more the expert in this area than I am. So I think the government is being very conservative. But if we were to get a windfall, what will happen is this. The windfall, Mr. Vice President, is going to be used to service the debt that we have contracted over the last decade. And the minister, as much as she likes, and the senior minister, to deliver to the people, may not be able to so do, because everything we earn from a surplus in oil and gas will then have to be used to service that stock that we accumulated in the past. The Heritage Fund, Mr. Vice President, well, everyone I think in the country knows my position on it. We have not built up as much as we should have built. When we look at the budget of 2005, we saw that there was rising revenue, but at the same time rising expenditure. I think that's where the problem arose. In 2004, we spent $18 billion. And in 2005, government expenditure rose to $32 billion. That was a massive 75% increase. And the reason for that was simple. We obtained for the first time an injection of new revenue from LNG. The LNG trains came on. And the problem with government expenditure is this. Once you move expenditure from 18 to 32, it is almost impossible to move it from 32 to 25. So that when your revenue falls, and I don't know if the politicians will ever get this, there is something known in economics as a ratchet effect. You put expenditure up. There are so many interests now. The people in government now realize, as hard as you try, Honorable Minister, you are not going to get expenditure down below 50 billion. It will take a great deal of effort to bring the expenditure down below 50. And what this country desperately needs, we have had in the past the following revenue injections. Light manufacturing in the 60s and 70s. Heavy industry in Point Creese in the 80s. LNG in the 2000s. We are looking for our fourth plant now. Cutting expenditure is politically almost impossible. Not that it should not be attempted. And I think the government will have to do its utmost to try to collect, as the Honorable Minister indicated this morning, what a greater proportion of what it is entitled to collect, but at the same time, it will need to cut expenditure and find ways of cutting expenditure. All the areas in the public service where there is some element of duplication and any element of waste, that which could be discarded, we need to discard so that we could try to bring that $50 billion of expenditure down. But the problem, Mr. Vice President, is a simple one. As hard as the minister tries to cut $1 billion here in any duplication she may find in ministries, she is going to find that another expenditure of $1 billion will arise. From where will it arise? Those of us in finance know that debt have a life of its own. Debt has a life of its own. And the life of debt is interest payments. And the interest payments will be creeping. So I am hoping the government will keep an eye on how the interest charges are arising. And we do need now, as Senator Shriki soon indicated, to really look at our borrowings. Can this 2018 be the last year that we run a deficit? Can it be? Hardly likely. But there is a limit to how much we can borrow. And the limit is going to be determined by now the political realities facing the government. The more the government pays in interest charges when revenue is fixed at 40 billion, as hard as the Honorable Minister tries, I don't think she can get the revenue up in the medium term, in the current environment and economic structure that we have, to 40 billion. The plan is to collect maybe around 36 or 37 for the coming year. But if we have 40 billion to collect, then we have this huge gap. Could we somehow try to look at our borrowing and make sure that the overall public debt is kept under control? If we don't, we will find more and more of our fixed revenue now, not growing revenue. Revenue has to grow, but it has to grow with the fourth plank we're looking for. We are going to find ourselves in a position where we are unable to provide for the population because what we earn extra from oil and gas will go away in debt servicing. That's just the nature of what happens when we have borrowed for a decade. In this environment now, what kind of solutions that will not cost much can be offered so that the welfare of the population, the most vulnerable in the population, can be protected. Let us look at the very poor in Trinidad and Tobago. It is said that 20% of our population, the figures vary, 17, 18, but the bottom 20% of our population in the curve, that bottom 20% is deemed to be poor, that they are finding it difficult to cover basic needs. For the very poor, I am hoping at least we will find funds to finance the CDAP program. The poor people get their pharmaceuticals from that CDAP program. Well, how are we going to finance the CDAP program? We've heard about drug shortages in the past, but let us make sure we fully fund that program. Here's a suggestion. You see, all the fireworks on Diwali night that created mayhem in Trinidad and Tobago, tax the fireworks. Every firework that is being sold in this country, tax it. Put it into a fund and use the fireworks fund to finance the CDAP program. It will make a lot of people, poor people, very happy. Let us look at other solutions we can have for the poor. Poor people cannot access the banking system. The fees are too high. If you have $100, I understand the Minister of Finance taxing the banks at a higher corporate level because of how they earn their income and so on. But really, the poorer individuals can't really access the banks. The bank fees are going to be too high. In fact, the major banks are not encouraging the smaller people to obtain any kind of services from them. What is the proposed solution? Well, we need a mechanism where we could minimize or eliminate bank fees and still provide a vehicle for poor people to save. Poor people have been saving in susus since time immemorial. We do need to have the credit union movement in Trinidad and Tobago offer services of retail banking so that everywhere you go, there should be a credit union service of Trinidad and Tobago ATM machine interactive. I think we probably have 50 plus, or I don't know how much large credit unions. Interact all of the ATMs and let the poor people use the credit union as the poor people's bank. But in order to do that, we do need to have the credit union organization regulated, and I look forward to the credit union bill coming before us in the Senate. It will provide the vehicle for the poor people to save. Mr. Vice President, we're looking at the poor people, and it's not going to cost the government anything, but we need to give the poor an opportunity to lift themselves because the government has little money to give them to so do. In the past, there were institutions called the friendly societies in Trinidad and Tobago. What did the friendly societies do? They provided financing, if you remember, largely for funeral services, funeral help. And so it was very popular 30 or 40 years ago, but we do need now to look at the friendly societies again to see whether we could revive them, get them more proactive so that the friendly societies can be another agency, another institution for the very poor people. They too have very large charges when it comes to the type of expenses like funeral expenses. We have had the institutions in the past. Because of the economic environment, which is not going to disappear soon, we need to revive them so that at least we provide that safety net outside government for the very poor and the vulnerable in Trinidad and Tobago. We need to encourage poor people to also save. I do not buy the notion that poor people can't and don't save. They do. As I mentioned before, the poor people have their susus. It's just not recognized, nor is it regulated, but they do have their arrangement. Poor people, we know, love to gamble. When you look at Playway, I keep saying Wayway, that's what I grew up with, that's the kind of thing, but it's really Playway now. The majority of the people who buy the Playway tickets are poor people, they gamble. And I understand the need to regulate the gambling industry, but is there any way, and money that they should be saving, the gamble? Could we marry, and we have to think out of the box now, because the situation is dire. Could we marry savings and gambling? Well, here's the plan. If there is an account, say at the unit trust, where someone can put in his $100 and start with his 100, at the end of the month he agrees that $1 out of my interest will be put into a fund, and the unit trust has 100,000 accounts. At the end of the month, there's $100,000 there. And a random draw of 100 persons in that UTC will give each person an extra $1,000 in winnings. This is marrying gambling with savings. I wish the idea was my own. It's not. This idea has been used in North America, in certain states, to encourage poor people to save. So at the same time you are saving, you are participating in a gambling scheme. This is a government policy. Think about it, so that the poor people who are not inclined to part because they don't have too much money to save will be inclined to participate in such a savings program where they agree $1 every month comes out of the interest that they have earned, and there's a chance that they could win $1,000, and the pool is then evenly divided in 100. That is a plan for the poor, which we should now consider. Let us look at what we can do for the working class in Trinidad and Tobago. I have had the experience looking at similar economic environments over the last quarter century. And we have seen wage freezes in Trinidad and Tobago. We have seen salary increases of 111. One of the salary increases we got at the university somewhere in the 2000s was, I think, over a 3-year period, 112. That's the kind of salary increases people have come to expect in the type of economic environment that we have. They are low. How could the Minister of Finance compensate the public servants, the employees of the state? And the state employs by far and away the largest group of employees in a range of activities, and to keep them contented. Certainly, a wage freeze isn't going to do it. Sometimes a 111 isn't going to. I remember when Senator Mark was in government, he was agitating for a 5% increase way back in the 1990s. We were in a similar environment. What I would recommend is this, for the government to consider as part of policy, that if the salary increases you give, certainly to your own employees, is capped at a very low level, could you consider, and it's good that the Tripartite Council is now working, and this is for the trade unions to contemplate too, that you obtain an agreement that you get a base wage. But if the price of oil and gas were to increase by X%, your salary will be increased by a certain proportion as well. So you link salary increases in the public service with the fortunes of the Minister of Finance. Things get better for me as Minister of Finance, they will get better for you as my employee. Things get worse for me, no change for you. This, I wish, again, it's my idea. It's not. It's called a commodity-linked bond, widely used in Africa, certainly in countries which are heavily dependent on oil and in copper. You have copper-linked bond and you have oil-linked bonds. This is one way in which we can secure some semblance of industrial peace at a time when there can be discontent. I have also heard from the government that there can and should be no retrenchment. But let us be realistic. The minister is facing a huge gap, some $10 billion at least, in which she will have to borrow. There are firms out there, also in this economic climate, finding their profitability being affected. And not only must they pay for raw materials and they're servicing their own debt, they have a wage bill as well. But if they can't afford to pay the wage bill to employ 100%, retrenchment for them is an option. How could retrenchment not be an option? Let us consider this concept called work sharing. Instead of employing 80 workers and retrenching 20, could we keep all 100, but tell everyone, I could only pay you for 4 days for the week? Again, I wish it were my idea. It's not the old economic concept. So that the wages bill, everybody then shares in the wage, and it's not as if 80 workers get a full salary and 20 get nothing. So we need the Tripartite Commission to look at the commodity-linked bonds. We need for them to look at work sharing. And we need, Mr. President, you see, everybody could complain, you know. Not everybody could come up with solutions. People may not like the solutions, but I tell you something. When I come up with a solution, it's usually one more than other people have. It may not be the best, but you have to think now solutions. Because calling for rebellion and mayhem ain't going to fix this problem. It is going to be how we solve it and how we think outside the box. And let us think about work sharing, commodity-linked bonds. And you see this savings as a lottery, I think it is going to go down well with the poor people. I want the government to consider it. We have solutions, you know, but it's whether the government, and one thing I must say, the Minister of Finance, Minister Imbert, has been implementing some of the recommendations I have made. When I come to concluding, I will have some more, but I have seen, for example, life certificates for old age pensioners, which I have agitated for, is going to be a thing of the past at the end of this year. I have seen this particular proposal of having a home for $750,000 as constructed a 1,000-square-foot home. I would want to encourage him to go again further if he can get a one-bedroom for $500,000. This is a challenge for the construction community. Can they bring one-bedroom condos for $500, three-bedroom condos for $750? We will be giving the people an opportunity to acquire their own property. So there are things we can do via changing policy. It's not going to cost money. Right now, we have no money to spend. Let us see how we can change our policy. And as I am on the working class, I want the government to consider the following. I don't want retrenchment. I want work sharing. But if there is retrenchment, will the members of cabinet look at the conditions of the retrenched workers and say, well, okay, they can get a food card for the next 3 months. This would give them some kind of temporary safety net. So the food card program is really for the needy. But if there is a retrenchment, I think government can have a policy where they could also provide a food card for a 3-month period for individuals who unfortunately have been retrenched. Let us, Mr. Vice President, see what we can do for the middle class in Trinidad and Tobago in this time of acute shortage. Well, we know that middle class people do have an opportunity to save. I had asked for a bond fund. We had asked, Senator Small and I had asked for government savings bonds. It was introduced, but the interest rate wasn't so attractive. No, it wasn't. I thought they had introduced the government savings bonds at some 3%. But if they haven't, this is what I would recommend. I recommended it last year. The Minister of Finance indicated that he would consider it. What I have in mind for the middle class is this: a bond fund coming in the middle at, say, the Unit Trust Corporation, between the equities fund, which is risky, the money market fund, which yields very little, a bond fund which invests only in government bonds. You see, if the government is borrowing locally, I think the people should benefit from that, and not only the large financial institutions. And so if there is a bond fund where the Unit Trust Corporation is mandated, it may require a change of legislation, mandated to invest only in government bonds, we provide for the middle class an opportunity to save into a fund, investing only in government's bonds, paying something like 4%, 4.5%, maybe 3 times what they are getting in the money market. But the other point I want to raise for the middle class is this. It is with respect to the financing of tertiary education. I want to endorse the policy of the government with respect to GATE. Providing GATE financing for the poorest students is what I think policy is and what it should be. But the problem is that we have middle-income people who are caught in the middle with respect to financing tertiary education. They have come to expect it. The reality is, GATE was introduced at a time when the price of oil was $1.40 and the price of gas was $14. That was once upon a time. And so, in order for the middle-income earner to finance tertiary education for his or her child, I recommend to the government the following: that the contributions which are placed in their retirement accounts, called the TISP and the future cash annuities, for which the minister grants some $30,000 as a concession on his chargeable income. That is a retirement fund. But in order to assist with GATE financing or the financing of education, I would like the government to consider as part of its policy whether it would allow parents who have these TISP accounts to draw down on some of the TISP for tertiary education in addition to their retirement. And what that will do is that it will prevent them from going to take loans to finance education. They could dip into that pool of savings. So instead of having a separate education savings plan, we use a TISP as a multi-purpose vehicle to allow parents who have these TISPs and whose children are coming to go to university in a couple of years, the opportunity then to draw a portion of that so that they could finance the education of their children at the university, given that the funds for TISP certainly no longer is there. And just as the Minister of Finance in his presentation in the other place indicated that we need, Mr. Vice President, to have WASA, TNTech, Petrotrin, Caribbean Airlines reduce their expenditures and increase their efficiency. You know, there is no rule which says the University of the West Indies cannot raise its own money. And when I look at Harvard University, I see the endowment is $36 billion. And people will say, well, UE is not Harvard, though I think it should be. But I look at another university called Grinnell College. None of us here probably know of Grinnell College. It's in Iowa. Grinnell College has an endowment of $1.6 billion US for 1,200 students. How did Grinnell get that? How did they earn it? I urge the government to talk to the administrators at UE to follow the Grinnell model and let us start having an endowment at the University of the West Indies too, so that they could wean themselves more and more away from the Ministry of Finance of Trinidad and Tobago and start to provide their own endowments and support for worthy students in their campus. That's the route universities are going. And when you look at the endowment of colleges in the United States and elsewhere, you will see that the UE is nowhere in the running. Well, let us charge the new principal with an endowment. And if he did not know of Grinnell College before, he now knows. Go and look at it. I would like to talk, but I no longer am there. But right? Let us now, the solutions, Mr. Vice President, let us continue with them. You know, in this time of scarcity, we still need to protect the health status of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. There are two diseases which afflicts everybody, in particular the poorer people. One is diabetes and one is hypertension. We have huge numbers of our population with these two diseases. But you know something? If we detect these diseases early, it will save the state thousands per patient. How do we do that? Well, the medical practitioners tell us that you should monitor and test yourself as soon as you reach age 40. There will be debate. Some people will say that you should get a diabetes, hypertension test when you reach 30. But let us say you reach age 40. I am recommending, and you see the government is a team, has a Ministry of Health. On your 40th birthday, every single citizen in Trinidad and Tobago should get a gift. Go to the nearest pharmacy and have yourself tested for diabetes and hypertension on your 40th birthday. It will cost the government $10 per person. Where will the $10 come from? Remember the fireworks tax? Yeah, for the CDAP? Right, that is where it will come from. And we do early testing. I raise this, Mr. Vice President, because I have seen too many people of my age and younger, with whom I have grown up, lose their limbs over a disease that had there been early detection, we would, for $10, it will take $5 for the diabetic pinprick and $5 to pay the pharmacist to do the pressure test. We know where we stand. And if on your 41st birthday, it is shown that your blood sugar is elevated, we know go on treatment immediately. Instead of waiting to age 55 for you to have an amputation of your limbs and your toes. This is something I think the government should consider, part of the CDAP program, and it's no charge to the citizen, very minimal charge to the state, and I've already identified the source of funding. So we can do that, and we could at least protect the welfare of the poor in that way. They don't have to pay for it. Let us look at the issue we have seen last week. I saw my good friend and colleague, Minister of Local Government working very, very hard in the Southland, in the flooded areas. I don't think the Minister of Local Government should face this kind of debacle again. Flooding should be a thing of the past. So how do we do that? I was told that, a lot of the water courses and so on are clogged with plastic bottles. I was told that you have debris.
Senator, you have 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. Are you sure you don't want to give me? I have plenty of solutions for the government. All right. Don't worry, we have a full year. Right, okay. Mr. Vice President, I think we could stop the clock a little bit, but not to worry. I've begged and I have failed 4 times. I think that we now need, really, to look at the beverage containers bill, bring it, and let us start to really control waste in Trinidad and Tobago in our water courses. And I put forward for the government to consider it won't cost money. This is what we can fix in the legislation. You see, I don't think the Minister of Local Government should go out on floods again. It's not healthy for him to go and get all kind of things on your tall boot. I'm sure the kind of water I saw Minister walked in, a lot of water would have gone in his tall boots. So, and that's not healthy, right? So we need to protect the health status of senators as well. Could we look at the health, and that this is for the government to consider, the beverage containers bill, and also consider, like Guyana and Haiti, poor countries, banning styrofoam. Senator Raful would, I'm sure, have much more to say on that. I know time is out, but Mr. Vice President, we do need, as Senator Rambharat has indicated, to change attitudes in the public service. If we do, we are going, and we have to try as government ministers. Mr. Vice President, on the 31st of July, went to the Caroni Modern Station to renew my driver's license. I went in there at 9. I left at 12. And when I went at 9:45 to pay my money, they said, we don't have a links machine. No links machine. And then I had to stand together with 2 ladies and a man on crutches for an hour and a half, waiting in line, competing with those vending machines before I could get my photo taken. I want to put for the consideration of the government 2 proposals. 1, please ensure that there are links machines at the stations for driver's license renewals. I have spoken to people, Senator Shriki is a business person. He will tell you it will take 5 days to put a request and get a links machine. Why is there no links machine? When, Mr. Vice President, we were discussing a bail bill, the issue of carrying cash was an issue. Now we are seeing maybe 200-300 people going every day carrying $1,000 in cash. The only beneficiary to that at the Caroni station would be the security company that is transporting $500,000 cash on a daily basis. I thought they were going to change. I took it upon myself. Yesterday I went to the station. No links machine. You see, unless we change the attitudes and this is a cabinet directive. their cabinet directive, put a links machine and make a convenience for the people. And second, for the elderly people, you know, this is what the ministers need to look at. It won't cost money. Could we say that for the 60-plus people who are suffering from arthritis and on crutches, could we kind of like, as a matter of policy, give them a little fast track so that in half an hour they can leave every government office? Mr. Vice President, in this time of scarcity, where we have little money to give or no money to give, and when the debt servicing will absorb every little extra discretion that the minister earns, what we need to do is change our attitude to dealing with the population. We need to show the population a little more respect. This is for the ministers to liaise with the public servants. If we do that, we will find that the level of discontent in Trinidad and Tobago may be reduced. But if we don't do that, when there is this kind of problem with the public service, and no money and no salary increases, I fear we may find some unpleasant things. I have provided solutions. There are more solutions to come. This country is a very good place if we can only think about how we will solve the problem. Mr. Vice President, my time is out, I know. I thank you.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, it's an honor for me to rise and contribute on this bill, an act to provide for the services of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending 30th day of September 2018. The subtitles being Changing the Paradigm, Putting the Economy on a Sustainable Path. Mr. Vice President, let me start by congratulating the Honorable Minister of Finance and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance and the staff at the Ministry of Finance for putting together such a robust budget and all the supporting documents. I also want to go on record as thanking the Ministry of Planning and Development for the work they do, in particular with the construction of the development program and the capital budget. And of course, to again compliment our leader, the political leader and Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, for inspired leadership over the last 2 years. And on this occasion, Mr. Vice President, today is his birthday, and I want to, on behalf of this side of the House, and I guess on behalf of everybody, to wish him a happy birthday.
You can join in.
Mr. Vice President, it is well known that the energy sector forms the backbone of this economy for several decades now. When the energy sector is robust and healthy, the country's finances and the country's economy is robust and healthy. When the energy sector is performing badly and has its challenges, the entire economy falls with it. Call it a single commodity economy, call it Dutch disease, call it lack of diversification. As we speak, this is our reality. Diversification, long overdue, across various administrations, will take time. And it may never generate the quantum of revenue that the energy industry has the potential to so do. However, we must proceed along this path, come hell or high water. I leave the rest to my colleague next to me, the Minister of Trade and Industry, to articulate our roadmap for diversification. And this time, I can assure you this administration will make it happen. Before I get into my core presentation, I will rebut or comment on statements by Senator Shriki soon, and to some extent, Senator Mark. But let me kick off with Senator Mark. He's my equivalent on the other side. And today I heard him, both in his tribute to Clive Panton and in his budget presentation, he used a lot of new words that I've never heard him use before in the 2 years in the Parliament. I am sure I give that credit to Senator Anita Haynes. I feel you're right in his speech today. But having said that, Mr. Vice President, when this administration took office in September of 2015, we were hit by the perfect storm. Coming out of years of high revenues, we were hit by 3 issues that resulted in this financial crisis. A deterioration in the oil prices and the gas prices, a deterioration in the production levels, both in oil and gas, which reflected itself to some extent, and for other reasons too, in a significant, precipitous decline in revenues from the energy sector. The non-energy sector, while it declined, it didn't decline at the rate of the energy sector, and I'll explain why. But let me deal with the oil price first. The UNC had a very good run. 2010, that's the last year of the Manning administration, $79.4 US per barrel, average for the year. 2011, 94.90. 2012, 94.10. 2013, 97.90, which is almost $98. And 2014, $93.30. You could round off that at the average of $100 per barrel over the tenure of the UNC. Then something happened. I'll just deal very briefly with this. In November 2014, OPEC, prompted by the increase in US shale production and the pronouncement of the country's stand to go onto the export market, did something to protect market share. They boost the production to deliberately drop the price of food so that they're hoping to put the shale people out of business. A total miscalculation. So much so that Senator Mahabir mentioned it, the inventories skyrocketed, the oil price dived, and it stayed low until recently a deal was brokered between OPEC and non-OPEC nations. The current thinking is that the inventories are dwindling, and it should show an upward movement in prices. As I speak today on Bloomberg, the oil price for WTI was $52.21 for futures, and pretty good-looking $57.67 for Brent. Wow. And our Galeota crude mix sells for $2 more than Brent. So I'm not saying the worst thing you could do as an energy person is to predict the price of oil. But I know I was in Russia earlier this month at a gas exporting countries forum. There they had the General Secretary of OPEC, the General Secretary of the gas exporting countries, Mr. Putin himself, and the 2 energy ministers were up for high praise was the Russian energy minister and the Venezuelan energy minister for virtually brokering that deal between OPEC and non-OPEC. So it is not as bad as it is, which means that the prediction of $52 a barrel is a reasonable prediction. Okay? But as I say, predicting the price of oil is something you have to be guarded against. On the gas price scenario, gas price peaked in 2008, $9 per MMBTU, $13 per MMBTU. And I just want to caution the country on gas prices. Gas prices is one of the most complex issues. It is where your market is, where your LNG goes to, whether it goes to Asia, whether it goes to Europe, whether it goes to Latin America. Henry Hub sometimes is meaningless in the grand scheme of things. But basically, the average price we take is the average net back price to the wellhead. Okay? And that includes a variety, a basket of gas prices that averages that. Its highest was about $9 in 2007, 2008, and went down to a low $2.50, and $3 in 2016, $3 in 2017. Oil production, have declined since 2014. On the production side, from 81,262, and as we speak, in 2016, it was 71,500, and in 2017, we saw a slight increase to 72,795. Gas Gas production was 4.07 BCF in 2014, and it reached a low of 3.2 BCF in 2017. But, Mr. Vice President, the revenue is where we hurt the most. A lot has been attributed to production and price. But it is my thesis, and I know for a fact because I've studied it, the single biggest impact on the revenue was the capital write-offs of the oil company that virtually absolved them from paying petroleum profit tax. And that was a creation of the UNC. In 2014, oil companies were allowed to write off 100% of the capital allowance in the year that it was expended. Nowhere in the world that happened. And, let me get vexed. It's not only that. On the exploration side, that is the 100%. On the development side, because exploration is high risk and sometimes you give concessions on the exploration side. On the capital side, there are two allowances, which is intangible allowances, tangible allowances. Let's say you're drilling a well. Intangible allowances are like logging cost, mud cost, and the cost of the rig and stuff like that. The tangible side is the physical tangibles, casing, wellheads, and what have you. The normal allowances for intangibles was 10% in the first year and 20% thereafter per annum on the declining balance. Intangibles was 20% in the first year and 20% after that per annum on the declining balance. You know what the UNC did? They made it 50% in the first year, 30% in the second year, and 20% in the third year. You're writing it off in 3 years' time. Load it up in year 1. So even though you didn't do exploration for that year, your allowances were so high because you couldn't move on from a situation of revenues of, look, I have it here. Oil company taxes in 2014 was $17 billion. 2015, $10.5 billion, and a mere $1.03 billion in 2016. That wasn't a result of production and price, you know. Allowances. They got away with murder. Good? And let me go to my favorite friend. I thought he was coming back in the Senate, you know. Mr. Kevin Rambharat. And let me just... So the energy minister, not the energy, the finance minister explained this in the House. And then, look the headline here. Not the headline, but the article. Thursday, October 5th, 2017. Him but wrong about energy incentives. He's the energy expert, you know.
I think you'll bring him back.
Good?
What's more saying?
And I quote Mr. Rambharat. He voted for that in 2014. These incentives expire on December 31st, 2017. Former Finance Minister Larry Hawaii put a sunset clause on those incentives. So how could those incentives result in oil and gas companies not paying taxes for the next 7 years? This, to me, is mind-boggling, is what he said about Minister Imwood. He's an economist or something, eh? There's something called carried forward losses. And then there's no sunset clause on the other allowances, you know, which is what I said was changed from 50, 30, 20 on the development side. This is the crisis. This is the crisis.
For the losses.
And that is the basis, which I will deal with later on in my presentation. That is the basis for the introduction of the 12.5% royalties. Okay? So I say no more on that. A lot has been said about the deficit, and the key idea of the deficit, and what is hurting about the deficit, in my view, is the fact that the deficit grew when the revenue was high. Senator Shriki soon made the point. when your revenue is high, you're supposed to have a surplus budget and put the rest of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. Good? Look, I mean, in Mr. Manning's last, the expenditure was $43 billion. It went to 62 billion. 62 billion in 2014, 2015, when energy revenues were high.
Imagine that, 50%.
Okay, that is where the crisis lies.
You talked to Manning about that.
Good? And because when revenue streams are high, you save, and let me speak of my favorite country, Norway. There's a Bloomberg article recently, world's biggest piggy bank grows by 285 million US per day. The sovereign fund of Norway is a whopping $1 trillion US. The biggest investment fund in the world. 285 million US dollars per day in returns. That country good from now until forever. Okay. So, Madam, Mr. Sorry.
Sorry, sir.
So Mr. Vice President, when this administration took office, the single biggest challenge facing this country, save and except possibly crime, was what is called the gas curtailment issue. Demand was 4.2 billion cubic feet per day. Supply had dropped to 3.2 billion cubic feet a day. The NGC was facing claims of $4.6 billion and possibly arbitration and litigation. I remember when Dr. Rowley was leader of the opposition, he went to the energy chamber harping on the fact that there's a major gas crisis afoot. The then energy minister was saying, no, that's because of the big blowout in the Gulf of Mexico and the HSNE issues were not raised and they're doing maintenance on the platform. So said, so done. Faced with that challenge, the Prime Minister took the lead. And he initiated two major significant economic activity here that will go down in the annals of the history of the economic history of Trinidad and Tobago. The first is the famous Houston meetings, where he brokered a deal with BP for a gas sales agreement with the NGC and for the potential to invest $5 billion US over the next 5 years.
Where are the documents?
He went, then he next met Shell. Shell was now committed to several billion US dollars to the investment portfolio. He brokered a gas sales agreement with EOG. And Mr. Vice President, let me go on record, and I want to personally compliment EOG, because few people in this country know that EOG is now the second largest gas producer in the country. And they have been consistent. Their cost structure is low, so under the production sharing contract, their cost recovery periods is faster, so the profit gas comes to the state. And finally, he met with Exxon, based on cooperation with Guyana. The second big thing that the Prime Minister took the leadership on is to broker a deal with President Maduro in Venezuela to bring dragon gas off the north coast of Paria Peninsula onto the Hibiscus platform and further down to Point Fortin and Point Lisas. Mr. Vice President, they could say what they want. Those two single events is what is now showing Trinidad a fairly brighter future in the energy sector. I will just deal now with a couple projects, just to put it on the records, that will be implemented during the next 2 to 3 years, that will hopefully make the curves cross again, and bring supply in alignment with demand. The Juniper project, which is a BP project, that has the capacity to produce 590 million cubic feet per day, that is already fully operational as we speak.
It's not a UNC project.
There's a BP project. It's not a UNC project, it's a BP project. The Angeline field development, that has the capacity for 600 million cubic feet per day. That should come on stream in 2019. EOG Sokan project has the capacity for 275 million cubic feet per day. The Truck project, which is out of Atlantic, has the capacity for 200 million cubic feet per day. Shell has a lot of activities planned for the redevelopment of Starfish, the Shell Bounty, and Endeavour fields. And let me just talk about BHP. Trinidad is becoming a more matured basin, especially on what you call the continental shelf, which is being explored by BP and Shell in particular, and EOG. In the profile of our basin development, you find your larger fields first, and then it goes down. So we are in the mature stage of that exploration program, where the chances are, if BP and Shell are to find new fields, they will be medium-sized to small. But then we enter a whole new province called the deep water. The deep water is largely being explored by BHP. BHP has drilled 2 wells to date. It costs $100 million to drill a deep water well. The first well, the Leclerc well, has found possibly 4 to 5 trillion cubic feet of gas. That's a lot of gas. The second well, Borokit, had some oil shows, but is still evaluating its potential. A rig is coming back in April of next year to continue the drilling in the Leclerc area to define the size of the prospect. And hopefully the upside of this basin now lies in the hands of BHP and possibly the Leclerc development. As an explorationist myself, I say no more because I want to blight the people thing. Okay? But I wish them well, and I think they're doing human service to Trinidad and Tobago. The next issue to discuss is no matter what parameter you use to judge activities in the oil industry, the best parameter, in my view, and in most pundits' view, is rig counts. As we speak, the rig count estimated for 2018 will be 12 rigs, 6 offshore and 6 onshore. For the longest while, 6 offshore rigs have not been operating off the east and northeast coast. BP will have 2, BHP will have 1, Shell will have 1, and EOG will have 1. So we face challenges, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. And once we have the proper investment climate, it is not only activity, but this government is conscious of the revenue stream, and I will deal with that later. Because it makes no sense finding and producing oil and gas. And let me say that abundantly clear. As a country, it makes no sense finding oil and gas and producing oil and gas if the state cannot extract a fair and sizable economic rent out of that activity. Because we're dealing with a depleting asset. And it is our right as a state to extract maximum economic rent out of that activity. But Madam President, let me just deal with, I explained to you the gas curtailment issue. But even at the height of the gas curtailment issue, the UNC went ahead and signed an agreement with Caribbean Gas Chemicals Limited for a plant in Labrie. In that agreement, that plant was given greenfield status which means greenfield investment in downstream gas utilization will be granted first priority for short gas after power generation and light industries. You know the type of exposure the state would have been if this was implemented from litigation from the already existing companies who is struggling to get a quota of gas. And secondly, there was something in that deal called a debt tail buy down, which means, I mean, it's something to, I don't know if it's a laugh or to cry. It means that if for whatever reason, NGC has 20% shareholding in the plant, if for some whatever reason there was a shortage of gas and the plant couldn't get sufficient gas, NGC would have stood the entire liability of the debt. These two, Minister Young dealt with this in the House to some extent. He had to rush to Japan and renegotiate this deal. Madam President, let me just spend a little time on Petrotrin. Again, when I speak of Petrotrin, it is not a nice story. Good. It's a company that, from being profitable several years ago, they now have very limited working capital. They're experiencing operating losses. There's poor asset integrity. There's extremely high operating cost. And probably most significantly is the debt profile. Senator Mahabir mentioned the debt profile. Petrotrin debt profile is now a whopping $13 billion. The gearing ratio, which is the ratio of long-term debt to equity, is 0.71 to 1. I mean, that is not the gearing ratio of an oil company. Everybody in this country knows about the bullet payment of $850 million US that is due in August 2019, and there's another bullet payment to come in 2022 of $750 million. Again, the Prime Minister had to intervene. The first thing he did, he set up a specialist committee to look into Petrotrin that was chaired by the PS in the Ministry of Energy, Mr. Selwyn Lashley, and the report has now been named, well, not deliberately, the Lashley report. And I just want to say through you, Madam President, that this report will be laid in the Parliament in the shortest order. Well, let me spend a couple minutes on the royalty issue. Because, Madam President, petroleum taxes operate at 3 levels. At the first level, which is an extractive industry tax, is called royalties. Because in the extractive industry, you are dealing with a depleting asset. The state has a right to extract its revenue, in that instance, from the top. Whether it is a coal mine in Pennsylvania, whether it is a uranium mine in South Africa, or whether it's a copper mine in Zambia, or whether it is a gas field in Trinidad, the state has a right to extract royalties. There was no royalty on gas. Well, actually, there was a royalty on gas, but 1.5 TT cents per 1,000 cubic feet. And the second tier is something called the Supplemental Petroleum Tax, the SPT. So you extract royalty at the top. In the middle, the Supplemental Petroleum Tax is a windfall profit tax. So because of the nature of the energy sector, if there's a windfall, like oil prices go to $100 per barrel, the state has a right to extract some of that gravy. And the Supplemental Petroleum Tax kicks in beyond a certain price. As we speak in Trinidad and Tobago, it kicks in beyond $50. And finally, there's what is called petroleum profits tax, which is the normal corporation tax. But in the energy sector, unlike other sectors, it is pegged at 50%, plus a 5% unemployment levy. So the tax structure is robust. It is just the obscene write-offs that were granted by the UNC administration that has allowed us to become in this position. So it is in that context the Minister of Finance imposed the 12.5% royalty on all petroleum products, petroleum produced, including oil and gas. But the royalty is already on oil. This royalty now will cover gas. So, Mr. Kevin Ramnarein talk about the allowances. And let me just quote one other former energy minister, because, you know, I have to deal with them. Caroline Sipasad Bechan, in both making it hard for energy investors. And here, and I quote her, investors are easily attracted to countries with low-risk environment that are highly predictable and stable. In this regard, the government should avoid capricious behavior as illustrated by the introduction of an ad hoc 12.5% royalty rate across the board. Imagine that. An ad hoc 12.5 royalty rate on the largest energy producer in the country for gas. And she calls it that, and she fighting to lead our party. And let me just deal with the royalties in this way. 12.5% is very acceptable. In the United States of America, royalties for onshore production range from 12.5% to a maximum of 30%. And most of the royalty rates in America are private mining leases. So ranchers and things leasing out the ranch for 25% royalties. Offshore production, it ranges from 12.5 to 18%. In Canada, typical royalties range from 10% to 45%. In Ecuador, oil royalties range from 12.5 to 18.5%. How is 12.5% ridiculous? This is still one of the lowest royalty rates in the world. And another very important thing that was said by the Minister of Finance in the Parliament that probably went unnoticed is that royalty will be charged on not what the oil company says they sell the gas for. It will be charged on a price that is adjudicated on by the Petroleum Pricing Committee. Because of the loopholes that you could use in gas pricing, the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance spoke about the challenges we have with transfer pricing. So the price on which you are taxed will be set by the Petroleum Pricing Committee. Let me, I have just about under 10 minutes now. Let me now deal with the petroleum subsidy before I close. The Minister of Finance announced increases in the price of liquid fuels, diesel in particular, and to a lesser extent, super. Because everybody, budget after budget, the economists say transfers and subsidies. Good. We should not be funding the level of subsidy on fuels. Okay? The higher the price of oil, the greater the subsidy. The subsidy for fiscal year 2017 worked out to be $823.7 million. That was met with direct subsidy from the government of $543.7 million, and subsidy and the petroleum levy, which is where the companies pay that part of that subsidy up to 4% of their revenue. they contributed $280 million. As we speak, you will see on the budget that under subsidy, it has gone to this year to 0. It is not that it is still 0, because there is still a subsidy of 21 cents on diesel and 29 cents on super. But the reason that it is budgeted as 0, it is because at a price of $52 a barrel, forecast in this budget, the petroleum levy will accrue $264 million, which should easily offset the remaining subsidy. So it was good financial planning, in my view, from the Ministry of Finance and the people at the Ministry of Finance. I just want to deal with one other aspect of the subsidy that is very little is known by the population of Trinidad and Tobago, and that is the subsidy on LPG. A 20-pound cylinder of LPG in Trinidad and Tobago costs $22. In Jamaica, it's 5 times that cost. No, we're not going to move that. We want the population to understand. Nobody said that if we were moving it, we'd have put it in the budget. But the population has to know where it is benefit from the state, where it is benefiting from the state. Good? The total subsidy last year on LPG was $243 million. Yes, thanks, Madam President. The state paid $75 million of that subsidy. And you know, sometimes we bash Petrotrin a lot, but Petrotrin covers $167 million worth of that subsidy through the sale of LPG coming out of the point of a refinery at a reduced price to NP and to the wholesalers. Okay? So Petrotrin has to absorb approximately $167 million in subsidies to LPG. What that works out to be, Madam President, is that the subsidy on a 20-pound cylinder is $34. Subsidy, eh? Then you add $22 to that, making it about $55, $56. And the subsidy on a 100-pound cylinder is $172. Okay? This is benefits the state is still accruing from the energy sector, even in spite of the reduction in the subsidy on diesel and super. So, Madam President, as I close, I just want to recap and say, almost boastfully, that the PNM has written the energy roadmap for Trinidad and Tobago over the years. From the energy boom of the 1974 and the introduction of the supplemental petroleum tax in 1981, to the transformation from an oil economy to a gas economy in the 1990s. There was a time, Senator Small will know this, that there was internationally known as the Trinidad model for gas development. I went to the gas exporting countries for a meeting. I mean, I'm now the president of the group. Trinidad and Tobago is the president. And the Africans in particular admire Trinidad because they see us as a role model in the gas. We are big players in the gas, you know. The PNM has been instrumental in the construction of Point Lisas and petrochemicals. The PNM caused the entry of Trinidad and Tobago into the LNG industry, creating the second boom. Now we are talking deep water exploration. We are talking cross-border and across the border. For a country of such small size, Trinidad and Tobago is a big player in the gas business. And I want to quote Mr. Norman Christie, the president of BPTT, and he's quoted as saying at a speech to the chamber, I think, that Trinidad continues to box above its class and weight in the gas industry. So, Madam President, as I close, the PNM has a proud legacy in the energy sector. from Errol Mahabir to Patrick Manning, to Barry Barnes to Dr. Lenny Seat, to the present crop of ministers. And one thing I can assure you, the P&M understands. The P&M understands the energy sector. So despite our current challenges, I want to go on record as saying that this P&M administration, led by Dr. Keith Rowley, will guide this country to a bright and sustainable future. I thank you.
Senator Haynes.
Thank you, Madam President, for recognizing me to join in this debate on the appropriation of the financial year 2018. I'd also like to thank my Senate colleagues for all your welcoming words and well wishes. It was greatly appreciated. I'd also like to use this time to thank the political leader of the United National Congress, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, for giving me the opportunity, via this appointment to the Senate, to add to my voice, and indeed the voice of many millennials who wish to contribute to the conversation of national development. I'd like to congratulate Mrs. Persad-Bissessar on her budget response, because in it she sought to give the nation hope and a roadmap for the future. She presented a plan for future success and has invited the people of this country from all walks of life to come forward and participate in national development. And that is the kind of open and inclusive leadership that the country needs, bringing more voices to the table, more ideas, more innovation, so that we can build the kind of nation that we hope to see. I would like to congratulate my colleagues in the House, who I know work tirelessly meeting with their constituents, meeting with interest groups, and trying to bring to the House of Representatives well-researched and cohesive responses to the budget. And that approach was continued here today with Senator Mark's contribution today in this Senate. The magnitude of our remit as the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago is not lost on me. It is an honor for me to be able to be here to contribute in the budget debate, because I understand that when I stand to speak, I speak for a generation of Trinidadians and Tobagonians who have so much to offer and who have seen so little in terms of access to opportunities to contribute to society in a meaningful way. And that would be the overall theme of my presentation, looking at what this government has done in terms of access to opportunities for the people of this country. And I speak for the women and men of this country who want to give Trinidad and Tobago all that they have to offer, but who feel disconnected from the system, disconnected from the process, and disconnected from leadership. And to the thousands of people who have reached out to me on social media, in person, and who have tried to share their ideas and concerns, I just want to say thank you to them for believing once again that you can be included in this process by reaching out to people who sit in a parliament that is meant to represent you. The theme the Minister of Finance chose for this year's budget, changing the paradigm, I thought was very interesting. When you wish to change the paradigm as a sitting government, I just assume you're willing to change yourself, but, And in that section of his budget, he listed a series of ills and things that needed to be cured in order for our society to move forward and to grow. And then I listened to the rest of the minister's presentation. And despite articulating this need for change and this paradigm shift, there was very little by way of new ideas, by way of innovation, and quite frankly, there was no plan to fix anything. And so it was a package of things previously said, a package of promises previously broken. And I think, as Senator Mahabir said, he's seen it and heard it before. But Madam President, with absolutely nothing groundbreaking and nothing earth-shattering in that budget, what we can see is that the minister sought to continue his administration's narrative, a narrative that this country is growing increasingly tired of. As Senator Khan alluded to, I do have a fair amount of experience in communications, and in particular, political communications. And so it may be easier for me than some to pick up on the government's narrative. And it's the things that they say over and over to convince the population of a particular reality. And from the onset, that narrative has been that this country is bankrupt, and that the sky is falling, and that it is Kamala's fault. and that they would like for all of us to believe that whenever they must implement some measure that the population would not be happy with, you have to blame the previous administration. And the government is engaging in fiscal policies that are unduly overburdening the people of this country, and they have sought to pass the buck for decisions that they have taken. And so there's an article in the British Journal of Psychology that looks to assess this idea of why people seek to blame others. And Senator Rambharat, in his contribution, also spent quite a lot of time seeking to what I think he thinks is put in perspective for our current situation. But what I see as is that he's forgotten that 2 years has passed, and he's not accounted for what he's done in the 2 years, but he sort of put the blame on our previous administration. And he spoke about the farmers' markets, and the farmers' markets in Shugwanas and in the Queen's Park Savannah, which I think are great. And I attend farmers' markets, and it's one of my favorite things to do on Sundays and on the weekends. But who's going to be at the farmers' market this weekend? Because according to the news reports, 85 to 90% of our farmers have been affected by the flooding. And I don't know if the minister did not know that there were floods this weekend, well, this past week, but the farmers probably were waiting for his response today to hear something about what would be done for them, and nothing was forthcoming. But blame is an excellent defense mechanism. So whether you call it projection or denial, displacement, it helps you keep a keen sense of your own self-esteem, and so you avoid confronting your own flaws and failures. It is a tool that they can use when you're in attack mode. So as the country becomes increasingly more aware of the incompetence of this government, they try to find more and new innovative ways to blame the previous administration. And blame it is easier to blame someone than to accept responsibility, because the fact is that you are in charge now, and you do have a responsibility to the people of this country, and the responsibility is not to come here time after time and say what was done between 2010 and 2015, but to say what's being done right now. And there's an unwillingness to face the truth. And so it is easy to see Kamala is at fault, the UNC is at fault, and they are the bad guys. But it's not so easy to say that you don't have a plan for future development, and that's why we're in the situation that we're in. Work is easier said than done. It is easier to make excuses, and that is what we've seen for the past 2 years. Excuses. With the Attorney General in the House coming to the House and saying that the opposition is saying, don't cut this and leave this alone. But we've not told him or the government how they should find the money. So here's the thing. This is not some alternate reality. All governments have to balance expenditure. You have to balance spending. Economics is the allocation of scarce resources to satisfy unlimited wants and needs. Individuals do it, businesses do it, and governments do it all the time. So I'm very confused as to why there seems to be this surprise at this rule, that this is what you have to do as a government. No one is questioning falling oil prices, and no one is questioning the fact that you do have a revenue constraint. But what we are questioning are your priorities. What you do have control over is how you spend the money that you do have. And so what we've seen is Ferrygate, fake oil, paintings, soak on the seas, phone bills, hotel bills, golf course maintenance, and the list goes on. So the question becomes, so the nation has a right to question what your priorities are. And so we've been told that we have a false expectation for expenditure, and there's a lot of blame and people of Trinidad and Tobago, I think, in the budget debate have been painted as these vociferous creatures who are clawing at the government on a daily basis for more and more. And I want to in some regard, reject that idea and that painting of the people of this country. It's because the government is still spending money. What the people are saying is that there's a question of management and even one of incompetence, because while you're spending, you're not actually delivering on any of your objectives. So that so that money is being spent and the people just aren't seeing it. So they have questions and they're upset. So it's not that they're greedy and that there's this idea that they want more, it's that they just want what they were promised. And the philosophy that holds our system together is one of the social contract, and it is a political, well, it's a philosophy that's as old as the study itself. And John Locke's analysis on the social contract, I think, is particularly pertinent here. And it's particularly pertinent on the budget and the government's economic policy in general. In his analysis, he speaks of men uniting into commonwealths. That's the preservation of their wealth, preserving their lives, liberty, and well-being in general. And Locke can easily imagine conditions under which the compact with the government is destroyed, and men are justified in resisting the authority of a civil government. You see, where the government keeps taking, and you as a citizen cannot deduce a single benefit, and you're asked to give more and do more and be better, and while we all have no problem being patriotic and doing our part, we must ask, is the government holding up their end of the bargain? Do we feel safer as citizens? Do we feel economically and financially more secure? Do we have access to quality health care? Do we have access to education and opportunities for growth? Do we have better roads? Do we have better drainage? I mean, just again, looking at the flooding over the week, I'm going to say the answer is no. And of all the things that the government is meant to provide on their end of the bargain of the social contract, they've not delivered on a single item. And this is their halfway point. And so I would like to posit that if they had an idea or a clue on how to get us on a path to sustainable development, they would not have kept it a secret for this long. So it's that there's a bankruptcy of ideas, and the population, and I think it's important that the population knows that the nation, the country, isn't bankrupt because money is being spent. What you're seeing is a carefully considered communication narrative, and a government that's bankrupt of ideas and have nothing of substance to offer this country right now. And so if we just take a look at what was listed under the heading of fiscal reform in the Minister of Finance's presentation, he used what I thought was a particularly interesting choice of words, and the choice of words were repeated here today when Senator West opened the debate. And it was obvious unsustainable weaknesses in the structure of central government's expenditure. Under these unsustainable weaknesses, they spoke about GATE. And in her budget response, Mrs. Kamala Prasad-Biswas quoted a World Economic Forum article that spoke about the three responsibilities government has towards its citizens, that of protector, provider, and investor. And this ties back to our present-day understanding of the social contract. And so when we speak of the government as an investor, the World Economic Forum notes that the most important priority of the government as an investor is indeed education, but education cradle to grave. Meaningful opportunities for continuing education must be available to citizens over the course of their lives as jobs change rapidly and acquisition of knowledge accelerates. A government that believes in the talent and potential of its citizens will devote a large portion of its tax revenues to investing into its citizens to help them reach their full potential for an attractive vision. Contrast this sentiment with the idea of unsustainable weaknesses in government expenditure. You see, it is clear that in the absence of an overarching plan for development, that GATE would be seen as an expenditure weakness. Now, I'm not advocating for any wild spending and throwing money at education. I think that there should be careful consideration on how we invest. But I do think it is important to see education as an investment and not as an unsustainable weakness. You see, this boils down to the political philosophy of the party that governs, the party that you put in charge. The United National Congress understands that education is an investment. We understood that for the population to grow and to develop, we have to put our resources in our most valuable resource, our human resources. And so had the government come to the population and said, we have to find a way to reap more benefits from the program, to make it more efficient, to make it more effective, had that approach been taken, then I would have said, yes, perhaps there's some sort of plan. But they did not do that. There was no conversation on how we can restructure the program to align it more to the job market needs. Or did we look at emerging markets, emerging job markets, and align our education investment so that it was in line with our developmental needs? See, instead it was seen as as a cost-cutting exercise, right? And what I call slash and burn economics. So you're just cutting things out because you have to save money, so you'll cut it. Rather than saying, well, how do I spend what little I have wisely? And you see, it comes from having no definitive or identifiable policy background. When GATE was developed, and I know everybody talks about, GATE was developed when we had more money. And again, so if the question was that we were sustaining a policy item as opposed to just finding ways to stick money in different areas, then we would have had a clear consensus that this is something that was worthy of keeping on the books and in a more productive manner. And so when GATE was developed, it was an evolution from dollar for dollar. And free tertiary education was grounded in the policy that this nation wanted to create a knowledge-based society and wanted to create a globally competitive citizen. And so under this government, there is a paradigm shift. But it's a shift from believing that the citizens of this country are worthy of investment and that we can be globally competitive citizens, and it's taking us backwards. You see, instead of looking for ways to create citizens who can be more productive and therefore grow your society, you've chosen to, spend money on a highway to Toko and on a port when you're incapable of managing and maintaining the current infrastructure. So I'm very confused as to that level of prioritization. So you see, we have questions about priorities and how you choose to spend our money, our taxpayers' money. And this idea, I think, of branding people with questions on your tax mechanisms or your cuts as unpatriotic or unwilling to pay their fair share is just in poor taste. We are allowed to have questions. That's just the way our society works. And because citizens, I think, despite the narrative that's being created, are willing to pay their fair share and are willing to contribute if they can see value for money. I think what we're witnessing is a disintegration of the social contract because of misrepresentations on the part of the government, and not that the citizens are these terrible beasts, And so we hear of this whole of government approach where, and we hear the words, but then we don't see the actions or the action items behind this lip service. The allocation for education has increased, as the minister noted. But will we see the value for money in this increase? Are we looking at global trends that are targeting our curriculum to building more productive, more competitive citizens? Are we focusing on science and technology in school, widely regarded as areas with maximum growth potential? And most importantly, as the government pursues this haphazard cost-cutting exercise, are you thinking about the future of this country? You see, when you talk, about that 2010 to 2015 period, Mrs. Prasad-Bissassar spoke about this fourth industrial revolution, and it was the idea is grounded in moving Trinidad and Tobago into a science and technology space that would ensure that our citizens are competitive and not left behind. And so while this current administration keeps floundering around and looking for a clue on how to get us on the path to sustainable development, we had a laptop program that would see more of our students being exposed to science and technology at the and there's something to be said, and there's something to be said about the access to opportunities. You see, children in certain income brackets would have grown up around technology, and that their exposure would have given them a competitive advantage, a consistent leg up. So as they progress, they would always have something of a head start. So as much as people may want to laugh at the laptop programs and consider it to be something that is not worthy of praise, I would like to just posit that perhaps it gave students who would not have had that initial leg up an equitable advantage now, and it brought more people to the table of success. And so these were not handouts or weaknesses in expenditure, but rather a hand up and a way to empower citizens so that it would lead to greater development. See, this was a well thought out process, and we will continue with the process because we understood that technology would take our people and make us more competitive. So we focused on increasing broadband and fiber optic cables throughout the country. And this is the essence of an all-of-government approach. Again, it is not the slash-and-burn economics that you're seeing. It is not this idea that we cannot move forward because we don't have any money. And what we were seeing is the previous administration was one that wanted to empower citizens, and I'm starting to feel just from their policy prescriptions that this government is insistent on keeping us stagnated and dependent on the government. You see, the government's education policy, in particular tertiary education, is really not a paradigm shift. It has taken us almost 20 years backwards. And so that when we move from education and we look at the labor market and our job policy, and we look at the manifesto that they presented in 2015 when they were seeking this mandate to be in charge, one of the quotes that I thought was particularly important was that they noted that over the years, the labor market has become distorted because of employment of large numbers of persons in government-funded, low-wage, low-productivity jobs such as URP and CPEP. They also noted that there are a number of increasing university graduates who are not finding jobs consistent with their salary expectations. And then they made a series of promises. And then what we actually saw happening once they got into power was retrenchment activity and this idea that persons employed in the government sector are an unsustainable weakness, because that was also listed. The wage bill was listed as an unsustainable weakness. So you went from this idea of that you would create jobs and there'd be jobs for all and there'd be this smart investment to, hey, guys, no, you are a weakness and we just can't sustain you. So, you know, I don't know if the minister will give us the numbers on job creation and what is being done in that area. But what I do know is that there's a disconnect from the things that they see and the things that are actually done. Because while they spoke about job creation, we have a situation in Trinidad right now where a number of doctors had to resort, medically trained practitioners had to resort to an online petition. And the petition said that it serves to seek the assistance in highlighting and addressing the ongoing issue of an increasing unemployment rate among medical practitioners. A significant number of physicians, upon completing their internship program throughout various regions in 2015, were still awaiting responses. And I thought this line was particularly important. It is inconceivable to fathom, despite a clear deficit and underutilization of this mandatory resource, that both our public and private, both our public and private health sector, that over 150 confirmed physicians remain unemployed to this date. Now, this petition was created earlier this year, and these persons are medical doctors and unemployed. And when I was doing CXC and before I proceeded to A-levels, you know, you get advice from all sorts of people, and they told, you know, one of the things was try and do the sciences so you could get a job, you know, to become a doctor, because it's one of the fields that you were almost certain you would be employed, not under this administration. My information is that the solution has been to hire these doctors on 2-month contracts, which in effect is URP for doctors, right? And so, right, so they would want us to trust. So they would want us to trust that there's a plan.
Members, may I remind you, Senator Haynes is making her maiden contribution. The convention and practices that you listen in silence. Okay? Continue, Senator Haynes.
Thank you. And so I don't believe there's a plan for job creation, and I And I would just like to ask, do you know how many university graduates are unemployed or underemployed? I mean, the Attorney General brought it up in the House, and the Minister of Agriculture brought it up here, and this idea of high levels of absenteeism, and we need to look at our work ethic, and we need to fix all these attitudes, and we have this problem with our attitude. But then I also know, equally high numbers of graduates who have put in lots of hard work, lots of sacrifice, long hours of study. Their parents sacrificed to send them to school, because, tuition is one thing, but school expenses are more than just tuition, so your parents would have sacrificed. And then all that's available to them are dead-end jobs and things that you cannot make a career out of. So when you talk about the attitude you have to your career, you have to also understand that a lot of people in this country don't have careers. They don't have sustainable jobs. They have something to make money, to make ends meet. And that's not the kind of society that we should want, or that we should want to see right now. And so when you're talking about changing paradigms and cultural shifts and the way that we treat work, and we have to look at the jobs that are available to our people. And I get the sense that there's this bubble so that you can identify the ills. And again, as Senator Mahabir pointed out, there are very, very few solutions. And so if we opened up a job market space that was sensible, that was looking at global trends, and that where we can identify a path for growth, and that we were identifying ways to empower our citizens, then perhaps the government would be seen as holding up their end of the social contract, and the citizens would be more willing and able to participate as active and empowered members of society. So I would expect that someone will say that you can't expect the government to give you anything, and no one expects that. No one expects that, you'd come in and somebody will hand you a job, but we do expect that you would create this space for growth, for sustainable growth, because that is your job. And stop seeing expenditure as a weakness and start making smart investments. And so, every well-educated citizen is just looking for a way to live up to their full potential as creative thinkers, and using their resources wisely to develop the nation. And I would like to believe that if those spaces were created and made available, that they would be utilized. But they aren't there. And instead now we're looking at saying it's the citizens' fault. And so in his budget presentation, the minister spoke about the Business Development Incentive Program. And in it, he had high praises for the European Union model. And so I took my time to just take a look at the EU model and what they had to offer. And you see, when you look at what the EU does for SMEs, is that they have created a space for success. Just a quick look at their website, and you'd see that they've listed ways that businesses can access opportunities and meet people within their space, a space for growth. And so you look at it, and they talk about how they intend to create business-friendly environments. And then there's a drop-down menu on their Small Business Act for Europe, and how they intend to create this business-friendly environment. And then they talk about the promotion of entrepreneurship, and there's an entrepreneurship action plan, something that I don't know that we have, and how they intend to promote entrepreneurship. And they talk about how they improve access to new markets and internationalization. And then they go down into further detail on how they intend to do this. Because you see, that is the essence of a plan. You present an idea, and then you show how you can go from point A to point B. And that's how you do this thing, if you are serious. And they talk about how you facilitate access to finance, and that goes into further detail. And how they support competitiveness and innovation. And they provide key support networks, including your Europe Business Portal, your Enterprise Europe Network, your SME internationalization support, and a portal on access to finance. And all of these things are readily available. And like I said, what they've done is created an environment for success. And you can see elements of thoughtful planning and implementation so that they built a solid base for success. All of those things are absent here. what we have in the budget, we are emulating reality TV, Shark Tank, and the final step being a ministerial committee that will dole out $100,000. And so we do have questions about the process, and we do have questions about what is the space you intend to create for this vision that you've presented, because that's important. The details of the plan is important. And so, I'm speaking about the plan, and we've heard a lot about diversification. And for the entirety of the time that I've been, from the time I was in school, out of school, we've heard that we need to diversify the economy. So much so that I don't think that most of my peers and colleagues even believe that it's a real thing. It's, and this government has paid minor lip service again in the under the diversification section of the creative industries. And I see that the development of the music industry was given, $1 million, film, $2.5 million, and fashion, $4.5 million, with a further $500,000 for the business development of the creative industries. And I think what was the most offensive thing about this section is the mama guy. You see, I've had the good fortune of being able to study in New York, Paris, Rome, and Salamanca, Spain. And I've had the opportunity to travel across the United States and in Europe and immerse myself in their creative spaces. And I can say without fear of contradiction that the most creative and innovative people that I know are from right here, from Trinidad and Tobago. The most naturally talented people that I have met. And so when the minister speaks about us being on the verge of becoming export ready, in 2008, I was in Paris, and I walked into a club in Paris, and there was soca music playing. This is 2008. In Salamanca, Spain, Marshall Montano was big on the university music scene. So you can walk in as a Trinidadian, and they'll recognize our accent because of our artists. And then you had Marshall last year, or this year actually, in Carabana on stage with Drake. So this idea that we need to do something, and we had Bungie Garland on like international video games. And so this idea that we have to do something to make our artists export ready, or that we're creating something from scratch, is an illusion. That's just not the reality. We are export ready. And I'm just not sure what this $1 million is meant to do. Because our artists are ready, our music is ready, and the only people not ready is our government. And so there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the role that they are meant to play here. As usual, there's the unwillingness to trust in our people and to trust in our talents and to see our people as an investment as opposed to this unsustainable weakness. You see, because it's not the philosophy of the People's National Movement to put people first. It's just not how they understand the concept of governance. So I'm not surprised by how they choose to spend the money. I'm just concerned, as are many citizens. And as I move to the end of my contribution, I just would like to end almost where Senator Khan ended, because he said, whereas his tone was boastful as the energy roadmap, I was going through their Vision 2030 document, and on page 26 of this document, it says, the high levels of expenditure incurred over the years begs the question as to why Trinidad and Tobago has not progressed beyond its state of development. It goes further to say that this is perplexing given the wealth the country possessed during the energy boom and in relation to some of the comparator countries. This is a document created by a party who has been in power 39 out of the 55 years since we've been in independence, and as the minister noted, governed through our economic booms. So if you are confused and perplexed as to why we are at this level of development, then what do you leave for the rest of us? Because we certainly would be left confused. You see, we thought you knew. We thought you knew where the money went and why we have so little to show for it. But if you don't know, well, then I hate your then I certainly don't know. So it goes to show that you can't govern with money and you can't govern without money. So there's an absence of ideas and a frankly destructive underlying political philosophy that this government subscribes to. And then in the last few minutes that I have, I would just like to address, unfortunately, some comments made by the Prime Minister in the House during the debate. And I will not repeat the comments because I have great respect for the space that I'm standing in, and the people around me in this chamber and those looking on outside. But I will say that people have been clamoring for new politics. Politics marked by mutual respect between policymakers and the people outside, the people of this country. I am from a generation that understands what it means to stand on the shoulders of giants, and that as we move ever closer to shattering glass ceilings, that kind of disrespect and degrading comments has no place here and no place in the new political landscape that we are planning on creating. And so, as our political leader noted, the government is on the Wednesday of its political week. And if you continue as you're going, you can prepare for a very long weekend. And through you, Madam President, I have a message for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Our country is great. Our possibilities are endless. And what you have is a government who has committed to a message of hopelessness. And if you change the government, you'll change the tune. I thank you.
Honourable Senators, permit me to congratulate Senator Haynes on her maiden contribution. Senator Creese.
Thank you, Madam President. And may I extend my appreciation for the maiden address of the Senator. The thing about this year's budget is that it comes at a time when we have a unique opportunity to start almost from base again. At every point in time, there's a downturn, there's a threat, but there's an opportunity to try to get it right, to almost start afresh. So it almost takes us back on the anniversary of our independence to republic period, back to the early days when the path we set out on was industrialization by invitation, which expanded or morphed into import substitution in the early 60s. And then beyond that, with the intervention of OPEC and the change in the price of oil and the resultant oil boom, there was some amount of greater downstream activity in terms of the oil sector, although we didn't really get very far with that in terms of what products can be manufactured downstream of oil, using oil itself as the base. But we got into the point leases and the heavy industrialization. So we moved from the light manufacturing, import substitution, to some amount of heavier industrialization. And then on to LNG and methanol. And although Dupré has come in for a lot of criticism, one of the things that he must be commended for was his insight and his willingness to venture, with other people's money, of course, but willingness to venture into methanol. And it is that venturesome spirit that has the CL Holdings to the value it has today. Of course, that same venturesome spirit had the government having to bail him out. But there are two things that are instrumental from this in terms of our forward planning of this economy and of what must occur at each budgetary intervention. One is that it is a time for review. We must review all the major projects, activities of the past period, certainly the past year, so as to understand where we are. And it is a time to possibly rechart the course that we are on. And in that sense, what makes Dupree a pivotal figure in our economic and entrepreneurial history is the fact that he was willing to go, I suppose, in the words of Star Trek, where others had not dared to venture. Because what we have, and that's part of the problem, and that's why the state has found itself in so many economic ventures. We have an underdeveloped entrepreneurial class. What we have is really a merchant class. This is not serious manufacturing or business class. It's a merchant class. It's what the old colonial arrangement has left us with. They're largely distributors, importers and distributors of goods locally. Biggest local conglomerates fall in that category. Fact of the matter, Dupree and Clico, CL Holdings, whatever you call it, was really the only significant player in terms of Trinidad having a real manufacturing class. And we need to bear that in mind in all else that we do and all else that we analyze. Because the state has found itself developing a variant of state capitalism, to be quite frank, because of this lack of this other class of entrepreneurs locally. That's where we are. The thing about it, in all of that, is that the state itself must understand that this low level of local capital accumulation, this tendency to stay at the level of a merchant class, has resulted in all these state conglomerates, the NGCs, the TNTECs, etc., etc. Trintopec, Petrotrin, Trintoc, NP. All of these formulations are a result of that flaw in our national economy. The thing about that is the state has to understand its role in that regard. And the budget that is developed must reflect that mature understanding. In that sense, because the problem is the limited capital accumulation, capital formation, and our banks are really not merchant banks. They're by and large commercial banks, with all the limitations that goes with commercial banking as the basis for entrepreneurial activity. Initially, it was clear that Williams saw his role in terms of whatever funds the state could accumulate from the oil windfall, of identifying sectors, targeting them for development, and moving on. So this requires that at some point in time, those assets that were accumulated in that pioneering division, the question has to arise as to whether they should be disposed of, and the funds derived by that used to target another zone, another sector, to take the development process forward in another aspect of the economy. So that diversification being led by the state has to understand that. That is the process. Now, of course, the question, and I think OWT's Roger raised that recently, when he sounded a warning against disposal of state assets. Because obviously the fear is that it will fall into the hands of the 1% or the 2% or that group that gobbles up everything but really doesn't take any major risks in any new sectoral development. But there are mechanisms, just as with the IPO, that can be utilized to control that gobbling up tendency of the 1%. So that one could allocate resources or the purchase of these shares, for instance, the way it's done with First Citizen or others, so as to block that gobbling tendency. So you reserve some for the credit union sector, some for the banking sector, some for the insurance sector, some for the mass public, and so on. And you have certain limitations at the speed at which these shares can be disposed of over time, so as to block that elephant entering the room and destroying everything or accumulating everything onto itself. So that can be done. So Roger's fears about disposal of assets, that process can be managed. But the state must not fall into the temptation of holding on to these assets, thereby creating a class of state bureaucrats who are directly benefiting from the state's possession of these assets. And we end up being right back where we were, because it is very easy for an old plantation society to fall into the habits of the old plantocracy. So that when I was growing up in the oil field, you know, there were kind of apartheid situation where there was the oil company residential area with the upper class, and at Palaseco they call it Beach Camp, at Faisaba they call it Crest Camp, and so on. At Point de Paix they had a different name. And then the middle income sector, and then the lower income sector, and then the village, where those people who didn't get the largesse from the oil company generally lived. And some between the two, the police station. The thing about that is, if we are not careful, state intervention into economic arrangements reproduces that system, and has largely reproduced that system. So the color of the faces change from mainly white faces to local colored people and so on. But the structure remained largely intact. And there's obvious dangers in that. And that's what the 70s was all about. So if we are to reproduce that, and there's a tendency to reproduce that too, the 90s was indicative of that. The state has to control how it manages that aspect of the economy, recognizing that the local merchant class is not an entrepreneur class, is not in a developmental mood. But the state must be wary of holding on to these assets because they are cash cows and they could feed into the budget. And when you go through this, the budget statement, there are several references to how NGC and Petrotrin and all these others are, in fact, now feeding on the Treasury. And Petrotrin not paying $200, $300, $400 million worth of taxes. So that's the concern in going forward. But there is need for clear public consultation on if we all accept that that is the model, that is the way forward, that the state must be the pioneer in development, open up the new sectors, dispose of the assets, protect them from being gobbled up themselves, and use the proceeds therefrom to move on. And not get to the point where they themselves become so dependent on these fledgling successful companies in the new sector that they see them as a revenue source and not the means to an end. And my argument is there must be the means to an end, which is the greater development of other sectors of the economy, and not as treasury feeds. They cannot become a substitute for the national taxation system. And that's why I use the term state capitalism, because that is what it degenerates into. And I want to assure you that state capitalism is not a superior form of capitalism. It's just another form. The thing about all of that, in terms of the national budget, is that, as Senator soon pointed out, we need to get the arithmetic right. Whatever the length of period we hold on to these cash cows and we transition the economy, that cannot be a license for over-expenditure, for hanging our collective hats where we can't reach. And I think Senator Srikasun's point is that when we look at what the returns are from oil and gas and so on, and the likely future return, and what our revenue base is, the question of an expenditure of 50 billion annually is highly debatable. Now, one understands the dilemma that the state finds itself in. Failure to contain that expenditure, or failure to keep the country at a balance or a keel, is problematic. But the thing about it is, you need to bite the bullet early in your 5-year term, to give you some free political advice. Because as the time passes, as the next election nears, it is foolhardy to then decide, well, boy, that is the only option, that we need to bring down the expenditure levels and cut social programs, etc. Because the consequences of that are obvious. Unless you intend in the final year to do like the last administration and go borrow Creese to try to not face the reality of your time. So the earlier, the better. And this is the pivotal period, 2.5 to 3 years into the regime. This is it. After this is trouble. So if we don't get the arithmetic right, as Lloyd Best used to say, woe be unto the algebra. And I want to say, it's the geometry that's going to be important. It's the angles from which we look at things that's going to determine whether we're going to get it right, that we are really seeing it right, or we are missing the forest for the trees. And in that regard, when I look at where the concentration of expenditure is, I am concerned. I am concerned because I don't think we have the global picture right. Again, in this text, the focus on the global picture here is on the price of oil. And that is where the problem is. What is lacking in the broader analysis that feeds into the figures, into the distribution, even if you accept the $50 million budget, right? As opposed to 40 to 41 billion worth of expenditure. It's the global analysis that puts this government slightly off track. And all the good intentions and all the programs, social programs, whatever, will be derailed. You see, because the global picture has to do not with the price of oil. It has to do with energy. It has to do with the source of energy that powers up industry. And if we understand the transition over time from even as way back as the Industrial Revolution, had to do with the movement from the energy base, from sail power in boats, wind power, to coal, and the steam combustion engine, and so on. If we trace the development of the world powers and industrialized sectors from that perspective, then we begin to understand how we are shifting off track, how oil and gas has made us lost our way, lost our perspective, lost our clear vision. Because we are, as a world now, as a global village, transitioning out of fossil fuels. Coal is history. Tell that to Trump. Coal mines have no value except perhaps as like a tourism village to see how things used to be when people got their lungs clogged in coal mines. Oil, fossil fuel, gas, okay, some amount of clean fuel, but the cost effectiveness, bringing up gas out of the soil, is what is going to consign it to the dump heap of history. And the sooner we wake up and smell those roses, the better for us. Oil and gas is on the way out. That's the global analysis we need to start off from. If we don't have that premise, that assumption, fundamental in our budgeting and our national planning, whether we have 5-year, 10-year, whatever, 2030 vision plan, if at the root of that, there is that understanding that oil and gas is history, that the other forms of energy, these are the forms that are going to dominate the world stage. And we're really marking time, almost backpedaling, if that isn't at the root of our perspective. So a long time ago, and I want to share this with you, it's well on about between 8 and 10 years ago, I was part of a team that was funded by Trinidad Cement Limited to visit a cement plant in Austin, Texas. And to my surprise, and it all was energy related, because TCL wanted to use a certain item as the recurrent source of energy. They were using gas, I believe, to start up the furnace at the cement plant in Austin, Texas. But the continued use after the plant was triggered up, like how your battery starts your car, the continued use was supposed to be tires. So they took us there to see how the tires were fed into the furnace. Flying into Austin, Texas, I expected to see, because I grew up in an oil field area, pumping jacks and so on. And to my surprise, well, apart from lots of cattle, it's Texas, windmills dotted the landscape and outnumbered oil wells. And this is nearly 10 years ago. Texas, oil country, USA. So at that point in time, decade ago, Texas, the heart of the oil in the States, understood where oil was and where they had to go, where the future lay. Windmills dotted the landscape. And I'm raising this for two reasons. To draw the attention of the Minister of Local Government. Because before I'm finished, I'm going to say to him that he is the most powerful minister in the future of this country, his ministry. Because TCL wanted to get all the tires that are in the scavenging or dump system in Trinidad and Tobago. So that's why, they were buttering up personnel from local government. They wanted to get those tires to feed into the furnace to be the source of energy at the cement plant. And nothing has happened since in that regard in Trinidad. The argument then was that they should pay us for the tires, and they're saying, listen, all you have to pay to dump tires, so all you should pay us to take the tires. And it got no further than that. But the bottom line here is the question of energy. And what are the forms of energy, and what are we doing? And how are we investing in such an energy-based future that is non-oil and non-gas? And that's the flaw in this budget, in the last few budgets, the last decades of budgets. We need to be talking about other forms of energy. And to return to the critical role that local government plays in all in this, because our Municipal Corporation Act 21 of 1990 says that the corporations are the collectors and disposers of garbage. And there's a model of energy for the gasification of waste, from waste to electricity. So instead of using your normal natural gas to feed the grid to create electricity, there is the possibility of utilizing your waste and converting it to electricity, to energy. And that is what places the Ministry of Local Government and the municipal government system at the critical center of the future of energy supply in this country. And there's nothing in this bill or in this budget statement that speaks to that. Absolutely nothing. And I want to say how long now we have been floating at the edge of new energy possibilities. And I wonder how long we'll continue to float at the edge. Because when I was still at a municipal corporation, a team, including then Minister Hazel Manning, went to Nova Scotia to see what they were doing and how they had cleaned up Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia was just like downtown Port of Spain and Beetham and so on. And they cleaned up Nova Scotia. So Minister Manning and her team went there. And Minister Sharma and myself also went to Nova Scotia. And nothing has happened since. And I'm raising that because there is a model for waste disposal, apart from the gasification of waste and so on, waste to energy to electricity. There's also the other model to make scavenging pay for itself. Because inside of this budget, I am sure, because when I left, it was around 700 to 800 million was the national cost of scavenging. 700 to 800 million annually. I'm sure it's on $1 billion now. And there is no return, it's just a cost. And the Nova Scotia model spoke to recycling and the creation of depots. So we're talking about economic activity now. People would bid just in the same way they bid to get a lotto machine and operate a business. They would bid and offer a site to operate a waste recycling depot, just a collection depot. So they don't have to have no particular skills other than physical space, 40 by 40 square feet, 40 by 40, and they would collect. And there would be a little computer terminal which would process the information, and every 2 weeks, the central recycling facility would pay them for whatever bottles, batteries, e-waste, all the different kinds of waste. They would pay people for bringing it in, and they in turn would be paid. Trucks would come and collect it and supply it to whoever into the wider type of waste recycling. So that was the model, basically. right? And that is yet to happen. So that's what I'm saying. On those two counts, the Ministry of the Future is the Ministry of Local Government. They're sitting on a gold mine. And nowhere in our budgetary plans, in our Vision 2010, 30, 40, or 50, is any reference to that. And that does not require increase in expenditure. That's the bottom line. It is treating waste as a resource for exploitation, not for soliciting expenditure and international companies coming in and shalala. None of that.
Thanks for giving me, Senator Creese. As your points are well made, and as we speak, the Ministry of Energy has a tender out for expression of interest for our waste-to-energy plant to be constructed at the Beetham estate, or the Beetham landfill preferably, to convert municipal waste into energy. The tender closes at the end of this month.
I thank you. Good. Well, that is good news, to be quite frank. But that's only one aspect of it. We still have the waste depot, which is an entrepreneurial activity across the 40 municipalities. I move on from that. And we still have the question of the use of solar, all the other forms. Good? The argument I'm making is that the budget should speak to utilizing UTT, UE, University of the Southern Caribbean, and our senior comprehensive. They should all have pilot projects in those schools. They should all have part of their curriculum being project development of that kind. Because if we are to train future entrepreneurs, it has to happen within the school system. We have to be pointing them in all the new directions we need to be going in at the level of the education system. That's where the flaw is in the education system. You know, you go to any of these schools, you don't see model projects pointing to the future. You go to any high school in the United States, you're going to see that. If we are to generate a class of entrepreneurs, we must teach them at the high school level to have these kinds of pilot projects. That has to be the education system. If not, we're wasting precious time. And then we're seeing the children are right there and learning. That has been our trap. Our education system is not organized to utilize the resources we have to create the possibilities that there are. We are locked into a kind of grammar school thing that takes us nowhere. And we're blaming the children. We're saying they're dance, they're not learning. I think Sparrow had the answer for that, right? If you learn all that stuff, you'll be a damn fool. That was his point. Our education system is not geared to solving the problems that are facing us, which is how to get rid of all this waste that we generated, how to create foreign exchange from the skills and innovative tendencies we have, the cultural tendencies. And when you look at what the allocations are, it doesn't relate to that at all. And that is my concern. My concern is that Minister Rambharat should probably have the biggest budget. There should be a fight between education and him for the resources. Because we have to teach each other in a new direction. And the new direction has to be, listen, brothers, if you can't feed yourself, then you're not a man or a woman. Has to be that. We are not feeding ourselves. The food import bill is too large and growing. And nothing in the budget convinces me that we're going to stop that trend, that we are going to back that up, that we are going. You see, we have to go back to all those youth camps. That has to be it. We have the children in the wrong institution. We have them in the senior camps and they're failing out. Must fail out. The thing not inspiring them, it's not making any sense what they're doing there. To go off to buy apples and grapes. We have to get back to those youth camps and the skill sets that they provide the basic skill sets provided in those youth camps allows them to be A-class tradesmen. And it's A-class tradesmen who are going to take whatever type of prototype farm you have, whether it's the new hydroponics type, the ones that are skill intensive. You have layers of plants in one shed, 100 by 50 feet on one lot of land, or whether you have acreage type farming, where you're producing those other crops that need that type of thing. But there's a mix of both, and we need to train them in all and let them choose which one they think they have the edge for. That is where it has to go. Otherwise, the Sanders Hotel not going to make sense, because Sanders will be bringing in his food just now. You go by any of the groceries in the East-West corridor, and the food coming from up the islands or it coming from abroad. And the Sanders project will have zilch effect on Tobago. Already, Tobagoans not producing the food they eat. That's why the trouble was the other day. That's why the grocery shelves were empty. Because the food in the Tobago groceries come going up in trucks on the cargo ships. And if we don't understand that, then everything else not going to solve any problem. We're just going to be spending money and not solving problems. Because if we aren't producing food here, then the foreign exchange problem will continue, and all that we earn from oil or whatever else will be soon dissipated. It will fly out on the same ships and planes that bringing in the food. So that's the next direction that we have to go in. And it has to be soon because we're running out of time and space, literally. So that diversification is not just about the mix of sectors, it's about the energy supply. Because unless we change the energy supply, we really ain't talking diversification. We're still frittering on the edge of things.
Senator Creese, you have 5 more minutes.
I want to turn my attention, because I don't want to sound as though, look, everything that is proposed is bad. All those little initiatives, I think they spoke about the new business initiative, the agricultural incentive, the tourism initiative. I think 4 of them mentioned where they are targeting a $100,000, up to $100,000 initiative. I think all of those are good. The problem with them, though, is that they should be revolving fund. This old habit we have of grants and so on, we give up that now. People must learn the value of money, and the only way to learn the value of money is to have to pay it back. Yes, you could have a moratorium and to give them some time to find the fee to 1 year or 2 years, but they must pay it back. And the same should apply for GATE. GATE should be a revolving fund. If you are educating people to go into a new income bracket, to return from the institution working for more than their colleagues who did not go there, then they owe us something. They got more out of the system than the next guy, and they should pay it back. It shouldn't be onerous, but they should pay it back. So if we take a revolving fund approach to all these systems, including GATE, it would make a difference. Then the future source of the fund would be obvious. So low interest rate, no problem with that, but it's the principal you want returned, so that other people can access it. And that would make a great deal of a difference. And it would end the welfarism, and the dependency syndrome that people like to criticize the governments for. And I want to talk quickly about tourism, if I may, in the sense that I have a problem with the creation of a tourism agency in Tobago. On a tiny island of 50,000 people, we have a THA. The tourism section will create another level of bureaucracy. Please. Already there's a problem in Tobago with the proliferation of doctorates and so on. and set up people with masters on this tiny little island, and they're all working in offices. And at the end of the day, what do we have to show for it? A proliferation of degrees that not really focus on productive entities. And finally, my last 2 minutes, tourism. We need to have a serious analysis of what are the all possible tourism products. I'll give you an insight into that. One of the missed opportunities when President Obama came here or before he left office was to utilize the American experience in Moruga as a classic example of how to use the DNA interests of people to link up in Maryland and South Carolina those families that ended up here as a result of the British-American War. Good? And we could use that DNA experience, and you could have asked President Obama to grant to the ancestors of these Americans, amnesty, because they, in fact, committed treason because they fought with the British against the fledgling USA state. But the whole point of that was to use the DNA connection between descendants in Maryland, descendants in Nova Scotia, because some of them went to Nova Scotia before they came here, right? To do that tourism link up, because it's really a tourism project. And to do the same thing out of India, and to do the same thing out of Africa, and to do the same thing out of other parts of the Caribbean where the French Creoles came from, and where the other migrants from, the Jews who came here, the Syrians, and so on. Good? That should be the thrust of our tourism program. That DNA link up, because DNA is of interest now. And that is the kinds of new orientation we could take in tourism that I'm not seeing mentioned anywhere in any of the brochures that speak of tourism. We're still caught up on the sun, sand, sea, and tourism thing. And there's a whole new world of tourism out there that we are not into. And we need to get there. I thank you.
Honourable Senators, at this stage we will suspend and we